All right, so I am going to bring up my slides. Now, um, this is the second in a two-part series on Recipe for Success. And for sure, you obviously you didn't have to attend the first one, but I think I did that back in May. And it just talks about what I encourage people to eat, right? Because this one's a little bit more about the avoid, decrease, eliminate kind of talk. So I try to be positive and try to talk about all the foods that we can eat, but that came in Recipe for Success #1. So yeah, if I do that one again, it'll probably be, next year. So go ahead and sign up for that one, and you can listen to me during that. I will be sending I think Holton, because I'm doing this through Western Wellness, I think Holton will be sending an evaluation, and we'd love for you to fill that out if you can do that afterwards. And I love it when people ask questions as we go along, or you can save them to the end, whatever you want to do. So if you have any questions, make sure that you're asking. And hopefully everybody received the handout. So I sent that out Monday. I don't know what day it was. I sent that out. So the handout goes along with this because I think you'll be taking some notes. And now I'm just going to put can you guys see the slides? Give me a thumbs up. Oh, nice. I love it. Okay. So the information that I'm going to be utilizing most for today's talk is from the U.S. Dietary Guidelines. So to me, that is a very well-researched, balanced approach when I talk on a public health basis. So when I'm talking to groups of people, it's a really, really good starting point. Now, does that mean that the dietary guidelines are the end-all be-all? Absolutely not, right? American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association, National Cancer Institute. There's lots of different ways that people can eat and have a very healthy quality life. But this is just a super good place to start. And then after you gain the knowledge from these guidelines, then you can tweak it, right? I mean, if you're kind of interested because you have a big family history of diabetes in your family, you might be tweaking some things here, right? Let's say that you are allergic to dairy. The dietary guidelines talks about dairy. So of course, if you're allergic to it, you're not going to be eating dairy. So once again, that's a good place to start. And I find that in group settings, it's a really, really good place to start. So this is the 9th edition of those dietary guidelines. And really, you guys, if you think about it, if you're hearing something super exciting and interesting in nutrition, it can't be true. Okay, nutrition, believe me, it's boring, right? Because it's the same thing that our grandmas talked to us about. Eat your vegetables and that kind of thing. So that's one of the things that I can tell people is that if they're hearing a commercial and they're thinking whatever the person's saying on the commercial is just like, wow, it can't be true, right? So. And nutrition isn't boring. It's my life. And my life is certainly not boring, but you see what I mean. Nutrition takes a long time to get super solid, good research about not just association, but causal effects. Okay. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking about those things that we all want to probably decrease, avoid, eliminate, so it's kind of the negative talk that I have here. But at the end, we're going to talk about stuff that you do want to include in your diet. But these are the things that we're looking at limiting. All right. So that's the word that I'm going to use. So, and it's easy to remember: saturated fat, added sugars, and sodium. So the 3 S's are the things that we want to decrease. Okay. So the looking at the handout and then using that, because dietary guidelines are based on a lot of different things. They're based on someone's age, someone's sex, their activity levels, their goals, lots of different things. So again, as I do this presentation in a group setting, I can't go around and figure out everybody's calorie level and et cetera, right? So I'm going to be talking in general terms, and the categories that we're going to kind of be talking about are going to be based on a calorie level. So the handout that I have shows 3 different columns with 3 different calorie levels. And For most of the time when I talk in groups, people in the group can identify with a calorie level. So here's my very basic guidelines for that. So women who want to lose weight should probably be aiming at that 1600 calorie level column. Women who want to maintain their weight, about 2000 calories. Men who want to lose weight, about 2000 calories. Men who want to maintain their weight, 2400. So with that, like I said, most of the time, everybody in the groups that I'm in can pick a column that they're going to kind of identify with, right? And of course, it's going to vary, but I think that's a good place to start. Okay. So at the bottom of the sheet, that's where we're going to start looking at the guidelines for the sugar, the saturated fat, and the sodium. And we'll talk about alcohol and lots of different things. The top of the sheet is what we cover in recipe for success number 1. And again, if you have any questions on that, just, ask me as we go along. Okay, but we'll be using the bottom half of that sheet. Okay, and before we start getting into some of these numbers, we want to review how to read a food label, okay? Because these numbers for how many milligrams of sodium you're supposed to limit yourself to, or saturated fat, you're going to get a lot of that information from food labels, okay? Or you can look things up, right? You can Google things, and you can go to MyFitnessPal and all that kind of stuff, but you're going to want to know where to find the information. And so we're just going to start with the label. All right. So first of all, oopsie, I'm going backwards here. I want you guys to look at the old label and compare it to the new label. And it's interesting because this whole process started way back in 2018. All these labels were supposed to have changed over to the new version, but you're still going to see some of those old labels out there. And the reason for that is it's really, really expensive for companies to change their labels. And so the FDA has given an extension of several years to get people's labels to look like the new one. Okay, but let's just focus on some differences. So anybody want to volunteer? What do you see that's different on the new label?
It's a lot easier to read, I think.
Yeah, there's some
The new
bolder
label.
print, spread out a little bit more.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Calories
So
jump out at you.
the calories jump out at you, right? And the reason for that is, again, as I talk to groups, I talk in terms of public health, right? And as we think about the US's public health when it comes to nutrition, weight is huge, right? 2/3 of us are overweight or obese. And so, yeah, calories jump out. That doesn't mean calories are bad. It just means that a lot of us should probably pay attention to calories, right? The other thing that's bold is the serving size, right? So everything in here doesn't mean you have to eat 2/3 of a cup of this. It means that the math, all those numbers below, are based on 2/3 of a cup. Now the feds, the FDA, they tried to pick reasonable serving sizes of foods, but that doesn't mean anything to me as a dietitian, right? I mean, because I work with people who could eat 5 servings of this and it would be a good part of their diet. I work with people who probably shouldn't eat any of this, and it's a good thing. So I always think about that serving size as the math, the numbers are based on that serving size. Okay. All right. So anything else kind of in this area here? What's different?
It looks like the percentages for the fiber are presented differently.
Yep. So
I'm not sure why that is, but I see a 14 and I'm not sure how they got 14 versus 16 on the other.
Right. Yeah. I'm not either, actually. But that brings up a good point in that you're always going to get absolute numbers versus relative numbers. And these percentages are based on what's called the daily value. And the daily value is a guideline that takes 2,000 calories. Again, not everybody eats 2,000 calories, but it takes 2,000 calorie intake and then compares the absolute number to that 2,000 calories. So it gives you a sense of what percent all of these separate nutrients are. Okay, I just cheated. Slide. All right, yep. So also the other different thing here is that added sugar has its own separate line, which to me is huge, because one of the guidelines we're going to talk about today is how many grams of added sugar you should get. And if we just looked at this number back here, that talks about all types of sugar. So not just added sugar, but it talks about lactose and fructose and all the sugars that are out there. So this was kind of useless. So now we're going to have this added sugar. Okay. Couple other differences are at, okay, I'm just going to go to that slide. My computer's touchy right now. The other differences are at the bottom with what we call micronutrients, so vitamins and minerals. And we have determined through really good research that these vitamins and minerals are what we call nutrients of concern versus these guys. So we have found out from research that really most of us here in the US are getting our vitamin A. And most of us in the US are getting enough vitamin C. We have transferred calcium and iron over because a lot of us have trouble getting our calcium and iron. And then we've also included vitamin D. Oh my gosh, sorry you guys. My fingers are sticky. It's so sweaty even in my house here. Oh geez. So we have recognized that vitamin D is a nutrient of concern and potassium is. Vitamin D because of bone health, also because we know that vitamin D, we're learning a ton more about vitamin D and how it's related to lots of different things, cognitive health and different cancers and COVID and the flu. So stay tuned for that information. Don't go out and buy yourself millions of milligrams of vitamin D, but it's kind of interesting research with vitamin D and COVID and the flu and things. And the potassium, we want to highlight potassium because potassium is associated with blood pressure control. So what we're trying to do with those 4 micronutrients down there is highlight the ones on a public health basis that are nutrients of concern. Okay. So some really good things that came from that change in the new label. So we're going to be focusing on saturated fat. So find that on there, right? That's in the yellow section there. We're going to focus on sodium. We're going to focus on added sugars. We're also going to talk about fiber. So that's under total carb, right? So yeah, that's where you find that information on that label. Okay, so let's start talking about saturated fat. So the handout that I have given you, remember, is from the dietary guidelines. So the dietary guidelines has a limit for saturated fat, but the American Heart Association also has a limit. So that's my little symbol, my little heart symbol there. So the dietary guidelines wants all of us to stick with less than 10% of our calories from saturated fat. The American Heart Association whacks that in half, and they want us to stick with less than 5 to 6%. So that's kind of the more aggressive one, right? So I put both those numbers down there. So like if you're aiming to eat about 2,000 calories, so I'll always use me as an example. So I kind of just want to maintain my weight. So I am going to want to stay with less than 22 grams of saturated fat a day, or more aggressively, what I try to do is less than 11. All right. So heart disease and, all of those chronic illnesses, heart disease, diabetes, cancers, Alzheimer's, dementias, saturated fat is not good for those. So we've got really solid, hardcore data on the effect of saturated fat on a lot of different things. It started out in the whole heart health arena, but it has become much more of a known thing that saturated fat is not good. That is super solid, good research, you guys. Because in the world of nutrition, things change all the time and it kind of ebbs and it flows. But we can really lay our hats down today anyway, right? August 11th of 2021, saturated fat is a bad guy. Saturated fat is typically found in animal products, but it is also found in a few plant products and those are called the tropical oils. Coconut oil, palm kernel oil, palm oils, those are very, very highly saturated. So anybody talking these days about, putting coconut oil in their smoothies and all this kind of stuff, so that is still a saturated fat. Now, there is a little bit of emerging research showing that maybe because these saturated fats come from plants, they aren't as bad for us as animal fat, but American Heart Association, everybody is still saying right now that those tropical oils, count them towards your saturated fat intake, okay? The other part of this whole saturated fat thing is hydrogenated and trans fats. So both of those things you want to keep as low as possible. Okay, zero as much as you can. All right. Trans fats are a byproduct of hydrogenated oils. So they can start out liquid and then they get manufactured into a solid fat. So they start out mono or polyunsaturated and they end up saturated. So that's a bad thing about those hydrogenated and trans fats. So everything on here, saturated, trans, and hydrogenated, thumbs down. Good research on that. Okay, so just a little bit more about fatty acids, okay? So we know that there are lots of different kinds of fatty acids out there. When we talk about nutrition and dietary fatty acids, the ones that we talk about are saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated. So the MUFAs and the PUFAs are good for us. The SIFAs aren't, the saturated fatty acids aren't. Monounsaturated, I have a couple more slides that this will be clearer too. Monounsaturated fatty acids, good for our health. Polyunsaturated fatty acids, good for our health. And then under polyunsaturated are a couple of different types of fatty acids that you've probably heard about, omega-3 fatty acids. So omega-3 fatty acids are a polyunsaturated fatty acid. And actually, the linoleic acid and the alpha linoleic acid, those are both polys, but here in the US, we get too much linoleic and not enough omegas. So they're both good for us, but we want to kind of push that omega a little bit more. And then there's a lot of separate research on omega-3s in terms of heart disease, diabetes, cancers, Alzheimer's, and how most of us aren't getting enough omega-3 fatty acids. The two omega-3 fatty acids that we talk about in nutrition and health are DHA and EPA. You've probably heard about those. Docosahexaenoic acid and icosapentaenoic acid. Those are the omega-3 fatty acids that we need. Okay, because there's other ones out there, but we need those guys. So here's a little more on each of those. So the omega fatty acids, super important for brain, retina, cell membranes, very anti-inflammatory. And that's why we think that these omega-3s are helpful for most of our chronic illnesses, because there's usually an inflammatory process that's going on in heart disease, cancers, diabetes, Alzheimer's, like that. They're important for pregnancy. It's interesting that with vegetarians and vegans, the vegans in particular who don't eat any kind of animal products, which fish contain these omegas, right? These vegans don't eat any fish, but they have a little bit lower blood levels of omega-3s, but we don't think there's any clinical consequence of that. So it's kind of interesting. And usually these vegans who don't eat any animal source of omega-3s are healthier than we are, than omnivores actually, right? So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of a paradox sort of thing going on. So omega-3s, we know that they're good for us. So back to the monos. So monounsaturated fats, good for our health, lots of different varieties, all plant-based sources. All right, so all of those things on the left-hand side are good for us, right? I'm not saying like you can eat millions of gallons of any of it, but all those things are good. Polyunsaturated, the omega-6s, which is the alpha linoleic acid, those are also good for us, but we don't want to eat too many of those and not enough omega-3s. That's that ratio that I was talking about. Now, can I give you an exact what ratio you should be eating? No, who cares? Most of us just want to eat more sources of omega-3s. Okay. Now, interesting, just in general, if we think about oils, so olive oil and canola oil and corn oil and sunflower, any kind of oil, those oils aren't necessarily healthy foods. It's the plants they come from. So if you can, anytime you can eat the whole plant, it's better for you, right? So if you can eat an olive, that's going to be better for you than olive oil, right? Because the olive has other nutrients in it. It has fiber in it. Same thing with peanut oil. The peanut's better for you. It's got a little protein, a little fiber, a little, but you can't saute something in an olive. So of course, they're in the culinary world, oils are perfectly fine to use, but don't get that in your head that, you know, drinking gallons of olive oil is good for you either. So it's really the foods, the whole foods they come from. Those are the healthy choices, and the oil is a good part of that, but not everything. Okay, so you want to love these things, the monos and the polys. All right, here's another little graph here that might help put this all together. Saturated fats over on the right-hand side. Don't eat them, eliminate them, reduce them, all that good stuff. MUFAs, I just showed you a slide of those, so those are good choices, right? And then here's that polyunsaturated, the omega-3s and the omega-6s. So remember, the omega-6s kind of limit it, sort of ish, right? And then push a little harder with those omega-3s. Omega-3s, mainly a really, really good source of the DHA and the EPA in those forms comes from fish. So fish contains both the DHA and the EPA. Boom, right away. How can you get omega-3s if you don't eat fish? That's kind of the age-old question, right? You can do it by eating plant sources, and I'll show you a slide of it, of the alpha-linoleic type. Then it goes through these metabolic processes, and it changes the ALA into these two things. It's a pretty cumbersome process, and so you have to eat plant sources of omega-3s on a much more regular basis than you do have to eat fish, okay? So what we say for plant sources of ALA, if you don't eat fish or you're vegetarian, vegan, there are lots of sources of ALA. Flaxseed, ground flaxseed, got to make sure it's ground. You can't just eat those regular flax seeds. Grind them up. Chia seed, rapeseed, camelina. We don't eat too much of that. Hemp, we don't eat too. Walnuts, walnut oil. Some green leafies and sea vegetables and pecans have a little bit of ALA. Some grass-fed animals do, but my vegetarians need to be eating things kind of on a daily basis, right? So the American Heart Association recommendation for fish is 8 ounces. I'm going to give you kind of a general, right? So about 8 ounces a week. For plant sources, if you don't eat fish, plant sources is almost a daily thing. You want to have, like, what I've read is about 1 to 3 tablespoons of these plant sources of omega-3s. Because of the cumbersome metabolic process that the plants have to go through, you have to eat more of them on a regular basis. So I kind of do a mixture of both, right? I don't eat fish twice a week. I just can't get myself to do that. So I eat fish hopefully once a week, and then I try to include these things most days of the week, couple tablespoons here and there. Okay. So it gets a little bit hazy in there about the monos and the polys and the whatever, but you can, I'm going to give you these slides if you want. So email me after this if you want a set of these slides. Okay, so here we go. Animals, once again, American Heart Association says fish, fatty fish in particular, 8 ounces a week, 2 4-ounce servings, 1 8-ounce, whatever you want to do. Or if you're going to do plant, then you're going to want to make sure that you're doing that daily. Microalgae does have, there has been a microalgae that's been developed that actually has that DHA in it. But just try to get in plant sources on a pretty daily basis. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. There's another slide of that. Okay. There's that saturated fat again. The more legs the more saturated fat. Meaning, if you look at four-legged animals, beef and pork and lamb, highly saturated. Poultry, 2 legs, less saturated. Fish, no legs, very little saturated fat. And plants don't have legs anyway. So I always think about the less legs, the better. And then don't forget those tropical oils too. Trans fats, we talked about those. Those are usually found in processed foods because of the hydrogenation process. So all those things we're really not supposed to be eating anyway, right? Cakes and pies. All right, so I like this slide a lot. So it shows that all oils are mixtures of fatty acids. Okay, so there's saturated fat in olive oil, right? But it's the name that we call the oil is based on the percent, the predominant oil in it. So we call olive oil a monounsaturated because it has mostly monounsaturates in it. But all oils have mixtures of these things. And you can see at the top there, coconut and palm kernel have more saturated fat than butter or than beef tallow. Palm oil, right? That's another tropical. That has a lot of saturated fat. Okay. So can I say that cottonseed is way better than olive oil, is way better than sunflower? I can't say that, you guys. I know that the ones above the line we need to get rid of. But what I do is I have a mixture of different oils and I rotate those. So right now I have some olive, safflower, and sunflower oil, I think, at home. And then the next time I go to the store, I buy other ones. I like olive oil when I make some of my salads versus other stuff that I use. Because remember, nutrition is evolving. And, maybe we're going to find out that avocado oil is what we should all be eating. So my message is any of the oils that are listed down below, I just take a really prudent approach and have a wide variety in my cupboards and just kind of rotate them. And of course, be careful. You can't do a lot of stir frying with avocado oil that might flare up and flame your house, right? Burn your house down. So you have to be careful of all that smoke point business. But in terms of health, any of those guys over there are good. Down below there are good. So this is just an example of coconut oil versus olive versus butter. And if we look at total fat, same amount of fat, basically, right? In about a tablespoon, same amount. But it's the saturated fat that varies a ton. And the only one of those that has cholesterol is butter, because only animals have livers, because livers are the thing that makes cholesterol. So no plants ever have cholesterol in them. But as you notice, we don't talk a ton about cholesterol. I'm not going to mention it except for this. So really, it's that saturated fat that's kind of the biggest thing on a public health basis that I talk about. All right about the same calories too, right? So, yep, there's no difference between a saturated fat in calories and a monounsaturated fat in calories. Calories is the same. Very little difference. Saturated fat here in the US found mostly in sandwiches and burgers and mixed dishes and things. Dairy is also a big contributor. Proteins, of course. So this just shows where we get most of our saturated fat here in the US. And if we look at a label, we can see that this 2/3 of a cup of whatever this is has 12 grams of saturated fat. Boom. That's it for me for the day, right? I'm trying to aim at 11. And if I eat the whole container, that's another new thing about the food labels that has really been helpful, is they give a per serving number and then they give the whole container. Because what do you guys think this is? Look at the ingredient list and then what do you think this might be? Any guesses?
Is this cereal or something? I don't know. Oh, that's pretty high.
Ice cream.
Ice cream.
Yeah.
That
And
makes,
in particular,
I see
Ben
the
and
fat.
Jerry's. Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah.
So the other, yeah, Who in their right mind is only going to eat 2/3 of a cup of Ben and Jerry's, right? So that's why the feds said, hey, we're going to put the whole container information on here because lots of people eat the whole container of a lot of different things. So if I eat this whole thing, that'd be 36 grams of saturated fat. OMG. And have I ever done that? Maybe. Yeah. Okay. And where does it come from? It comes from the cream, right? That's a four-legged animal with fat. Skim milk doesn't have any fat, right? It comes from the egg yolks, the butter, the eggs, the coconut oil, right? Blah, blah, guar, let's see, cocoa butter, right? Those are those tropical fats. So that's where all that saturated fat comes from. All right. Here's another, another favorite food of mine is cheese. Holy moly. So yeah, cheese, an ounce. I'm just kind of showing you the saturated fat content of cheeses. And, when you go to the store, you're going to be able to get this information off of that label, but they're all pretty high. If I eat a couple ounces of goat cheese, which I love, that's 8 of my 11. So I am not saying that any of these things on this screen or that Ben and Jerry's is a bad food. I mean, I will never say anything is a bad food. I'll just say that now that you know that you're supposed to stay at 11 grams or less, you need to decide whether it's a good or a bad food for you, right? So now you've got the saturated fat number guideline to go with. So you decide. All right, so now added sugars. So here's some just some background information on added sugars. And we want to remember that sugar is found in nature in a form that we don't restrict. So sugar in lactose, sugar in fructose, so milk and fruit, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the added sugar from sucrose type products, which is table sugar, or from honey, or from agave. Any kind of added sugar is what we're going to have a guideline for now. And here it is. So the dietary guidelines, this is already on your handout. Dietary guidelines divides it into, bases it on calories, right? So I need to stick with less than 50 grams of added sugar a day. But American Heart Association whacks that in half once again. And they don't care how many calories people are eating. They just say men and women, right? So different guidelines out there. So once again, I am, just because I'm old and I want to, do this right, I'm trying to follow the American Heart Association. So I'm trying to stick with less than 6 teaspoons or less than 25 grams. That's the same thing. So 25 grams is about 6 teaspoons. Oh, brother, right? Okay, so then here's where we get most of our sugar, beverages, and then sweets, of course. Okay, so I really don't worry about the added sugar in the ketchup I eat. I mean, really, if I'm having a tablespoon, who cares? If I'm drinking ketchup, then I do care about but it's really these pretty obvious, well, I can't say that. There's some things that you might not think has a lot of added sugar that does. So here's just an example of, back in the olden days, right? We used to drink cans of soda. And then we went to 20-ounce bottles, which is kind of the norm. However, those big, huge gulpy things are getting to be more of the norm. It's ridiculous. I mean, really, drinking a can of soda is super easy. But would I really, in one setting, eat 9 teaspoons of sugar? Right? So the way that sugar is packaged is very palatable. But whoa, check it out, right? So sugar, huge impact on our dental health, right? Huge impact on heart disease, diabetes, cancer, all of those chronic illnesses because sugar is inflammatory. So that's kind of where we get, it causes cavities and it's inflammatory and it can mess with your blood glucoses. So yeah, added sugar is another one that we want to really start to reduce. And number one, identify which foods contain it. And number two, start to reduce that down. So just a graph or a table of, grams and then teaspoons. Yeah, look at that, barbecue potato chips. Who would have thought that would have had 11 grams of sugar in it. So yeah, there are some weird things that do have sugar. Okay, so back to my favorite Ben and Jerry's. So let's look at, if you eat 2/3 of a cup of this, there's 28 grams of sugar. But again, who's going to eat just 2/3 of a cup? Check that out. 85 grams of sugar in that container. Oh my goodness. Good boy. And where does that sugar come from? Well, it comes from the liquid sugar. It comes from the brown sugar. It comes from the sugar. It comes from glasses, different sources in there. So dang it. You want to, sugar can be on labels in lots of different forms, and none of it. Raw sugar is not healthier than sugar. Cane sugar is not healthier than sugar. Okay. Brown sugar isn't healthier. So yeah, and agave, right? I should put agave on here, did I? There it is. Yeah. So agave nectar or agave, all of those things mean sugar. Also, you can look for the word OSE, O-S-E, on the ingredient list. And sometimes you'll see dextrose or maltose or some of the other OSEs on your label, and that's just a type of sugar. There's some of those other fancy words that mean the same thing as sugar. Okay, sodium. Let's look for the last S that we're gonna be mean to, or really, hit home with. So sodium, according to the dietary guidelines, all adults, men, women, whatever, 2,300 milligrams or less a day. We get most of that from mixed foods, fast foods, not the salt shaker. Okay. So, and I actually tell my clients, like, I would rather have you put a little salt on your popcorn and have you eat popcorn as a snack than have you eat a big bag of Cheetos. Right? Because popcorn in and of itself has lots of fiber, it's a natural whole food kind of deal, right? Cheetos, I don't know what those are, right? But even a little bit of salt on some of those whole foods can be way better than, something with not a lot of salt, but it's super processed. Or even popcorn with salt versus Oreos, right? There's lots of, Okay. 2,300 milligrams. So yay, my Ben and Jerry's, according to my sodium guidelines, I can eat that whole container. But yeah, okay. So that's where you find it on there. So sodium's kind of interesting in that depending on your blood pressure, depending on whether you retain fluid easily, that 2,300, if somebody comes in to me individually, we kind of mess with that quite a bit. But only about 1/3 of us are what we call salt sensitive, meaning that if we decrease or increase our sodium intake, will that result in a blood pressure change? Yeah, so even sodium tends to be one of the later things I talk about in terms of controlling blood pressure. I talk more about all these other things we've talked about, exercise, lots of different stuff besides sodium, actually. Okay, so yay, let's get back to something that we want to eat more of, most of us, okay, and that's fiber. Okay, so we're changing gears and we're getting happy now, okay? So fiber is really good for us. Heart disease, diabetes, cancers, Alzheimer's, all those chronic illnesses are affected by fiber. Also, just our daily GI health is affected by fiber. So you can think of it in terms of, what you eat helps your health today and then far into the future, right? Here are the guidelines based on sex and age. And so for women, I say between 20 and 25 grams, that's what you should be aiming for. And then guys, 25 to 30. That's kind of how I do it, whatever. Fiber is only found in plants. You want to increase your intake gradually. or you might have some issues and the people around you might have some issues. So you want to drink plenty of fluids as you're trying to increase it gradually. And to get to these levels, most of us have to include a high fiber cereal or beans, peas, or legumes almost every day. That doesn't mean fruits and veggies. You can't get to this number, but it's kind of hard, right? If you think about a cup of broccoli having 3 or 4 grams of fiber in it versus a cup of black beans with 12 to 16 grams of fiber, huge difference, right? So you'd have to eat a lot of broccoli and, traditional fruits and vegetables get to this number. So think about that high fiber cereal or beans, peas, or legumes most days too, which is good for you anyway. Okay, so a little bit about the different types of fiber. 3 different types of fiber that we talk about in nutrition and health. Viscous fiber, that's the kind of fiber that helps to lower blood glucose, lower cholesterol levels, because it kind of forms a gel in our gut. So it kind of absorbs those things. Insoluble fiber, that's the fiber that helps our GI tract, helps that food going through us nice and healthfully. So insoluble fiber. And then fermentable fiber, that's kind of a new category I talk about. Fermentable fiber is a source of food for your probiotics in your gut. So it's called a prebiotic. So these fermentable fibers are called prebiotics, and prebiotics feed your probiotics because those probiotics, those bugs in your gut, they're alive, right? And they need a fuel source. And so the fuel is the fermentable fiber. So fermentable fibers come from a variety of different sources. I don't know why the unripe banana thing is, but if you look at this column here, right? Chickpeas, black beans, garbanzo beans, all those kinds of lentils, peas, those have all these types of fiber. Now, there are no magic food groups out there, but this is kind of a powerful food group, you guys, for a lot of different reasons. So anywho, right? Now the food label, do I have the dietary? Yeah. The food label is going to combine all those fibers. So it's just going to have a total fiber number. And that's the number that I gave you here. So you just look at getting total fiber. And if you get a wide variety, then you're going to be doing good. Right. There's dietary fiber. Okay, so another thing that I want to always mention is, caffeine. And really, we've studied and we know that, up to about 400 milligrams a day, most people have absolutely no problem with that. Extra caffeine doesn't cause cystic breasts and doesn't seem to cause anything. It can affect how you sleep. You can affect your jitteriness, that sort of thing. Some people with sensitive hypertension can be affected by their caffeine intake, but 400 milligrams, that's pretty generous. So, a lot of people are like, oh, I need to stop my, coffee intake. And if they're drinking 3 cups a day, I'm like, no, you got a lot of other things you need to do before you start, taking away your coffee. So yeah, as a part of a well-balanced intake, I usually don't have any trouble with caffeine intake. Now, lots of times my students, however, are drinking lots of those energy drinks and those really high-powered caffeine things. I do have an issue with those for sure. And then alcohol. Okay, we've got to talk about alcohol here. So the guidelines for alcohol come from heart disease studies. And there are a couple components in alcoholic beverages that seem to be cardioprotective. However, alcohol and cancer doesn't mix. Alcohol and other things, other disease processes don't mix. So the guidelines that are given are based on heart health research. And so here are the guidelines. Okay, so less than 1 drink a day for women and less than 2 for men. You can't save them all up. We can't have 7 on one day. No, that's not good for our livers. But epidemiologically, the studies show that those women around the Mediterranean typically drink this way. They have maybe a drink a day. They usually have it with a meal, and they usually have it in a social setting. So there's other things that are involved, right, that may make a difference. For sure, the food makes a difference in how quickly alcohol is absorbed. So a drink is defined as those amounts that are on the screen here. So that fishbowl margarita that I had the other day does not count as one drink. Yeah, right. 5 ounces of wine in a wine glass looks like nothing. So this is what they're talking about from those Mediterranean studies, right? Again, plus if cancers and alcohol, not a good thing, so again, the recommendations are for heart health if you choose to consume alcohol. Okay. I don't need to go to that one. Okay, questions, you guys. We did pretty good on time. So lots of stuff to think about, right? But now you've got some guidelines and you can start, counting your added sugar. Do that for a week or two and then start counting your grams of saturated fat and then start looking at sodium and don't think that you're going to do everything tomorrow. But now with a little bit of guidance, you can get a little bit more particular and choosy. And you can look at cheese and you can look at the saturated fat content. Maybe we're looking at the saturated fat content or only the sodium content or whatever. But now you've got some numbers, some hard guidelines that you can start applying stuff to. So coming up in October, I'm going to do a workshop on the Mediterranean diet. So I know that is already settled. And then I'm also going to hopefully do about 3 other workshops, probably one on boosting your immune system, supporting your immune system. Because yeah, we seem to be needing that again, as always. The Mediterranean diet, boost your immune system, maybe something on gut health. So just keep looking at the stuff that's coming out. And I'm going to do a healthy way, which is a series of 6 talks. This is part of one of those talks, but it's a little bit more for people who want that weekly connection to really, it's more about behavior change. Of course, you're going to gain knowledge, but it's more about, hey, we're going to set goals every week. We're going to, and you're going to learn how to do this for the rest of your life, right? I'm trying to do this. I'm picking 90. When I'm 90, I'm going to not think about any of this. I can't wait. But yeah, so yeah, look for the healthy way it's called. That's the 6 week in a row thing. But then there's going to be all these other random workshops. All right. Keep at it, you guys. Hopefully we're coming on to campus or not coming on, or wear your mask and stay safe and keep trying to, there's another one that I did yesterday on how the pandemic has affected our nutrition and our diet and eating. That's kind of a fun one too. Maybe I'll do that again in the fall. But anytime you can just kind of click in and tune in for a bit, it's good just to pick up one little nugget of information and keep rolling with it. I always do better after I do these talks for a few days anyway.
Thank you, Gretchen.
Okay.
Thanks, Gretchen. Appreciate it.
All right.
Gretchen.
All right. Thanks.
Good
Bye,
seeing
guys.
you.
Bye.
Yes,
Care.
appreciate it. Take care.